Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
Wells.
We appreciate all the support on the recent content. This has been an insane week of NBA action, news, rumors, and I'm sure there's going to be more to come, with the trade deadline approaching. And as a friendly reminder, we will be streaming on the day of the trade deadline, February 8th, so put that on your calendar. Before we get started with today's episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
So, since the last time, we recorded, there's been a lot going on. We've had trades, we've had coach firings. I mean, we've had everything. So we'll
Yeah.
start off with the firings, right? So we had two. We'll start off with the big one, of the two, and that's Adrian Griffin of the Milwaukee Bucks. He's been let go. Um, it's kind of a funny situation in the sense of, you know, the record was really good, right? They were 30-13. But despite all that, right, like, both you and I continue to have a lot of questions about, you know, what would Milwaukee, true ceiling be come playoff time? Obviously, we knew they could win a championship because they have a ton of talent, but obviously we were concerned about the defense, which had not been great, over the course of the season. But now, obviously, as of late, we've also learned, even more, right? That like, the coaching situation was not ideal. And I think it's kind of funny because, like, our first kind of, I guess, red flag, if we go all the way back, was way back in the off season, right? When they had Terry Stotts on the staff, and then well, no, they didn't fire him. He just quit. He walked, right? And it was a story about, like, he was basically kind of being treated like, he was sort of like just, kind of like a nobody, right? He was a former head coach, and the guy kind of yelled at him, in front of all the other players. And that was a guy, Stotts, that Lillard wanted, right? Because he was his head coach in Portland, and he put together a lot of their offensive schemes, there. So that was kind of the first red flag. And then, in the last few weeks, right, we kind of heard, say, like, from Giannis, right, talking about, like, yeah, things aren't going great right now. We all need to be better. That in-season tournament loss. Yeah, he was like, the ball equipment guy also has to be better. Then the
Yeah.
in-season tournament, after they lost to the Pacers, right, you had the situation with Bobby Portis, right, telling the coach, like, you need to be better,
Yeah.
which is intriguing. But regardless, so all that, it kind of goes to say that, like, it's just, it probably just wasn't the ideal situation for this guy, right? Where it's like, it's a lot of pressure, and it takes, as a certain, it takes a lot to be able to coach a team that's vying for a championship that has a lot of veterans on it, right? Because, like, there are certain ways that can coach certain types of guys and certain types of teams, but I don't think you can necessarily try to coach a championship team while also kind of being, I guess I don't know if control freak is the right word, but, like, just like a very, like, you have to do things this specific
Nitpicky.
way, kind of like my way or the highway. Um, and it just didn't work, right? And again, despite the record, right, you're not going to have a championship, caliber situation if guys don't believe in, what they're doing, right? And they clearly didn't. And they replaced him. Interestingly enough, right, they replaced him with another guy who this time is a former head coach, Doc Rivers, right? Doc Rivers, I believe basically a 3-4ish year, $40 million deal. So obviously, amongst the higher paid coaches in the league. Um, so, obviously, I would assume, I would say this is an upgrade over Adrian Griffin. I know that obviously, like, whenever we had heard, like, rumors about Doc coaching another team, we were like, we're not really so sure about that. But it is, I would say, he would be a better fit for these guys than Adrian Griffin because he is a veteran coach. He did coach a championship team. And I think he is a guy that, you know, can reach his players a little bit better, right? He's kind of regarded, I think, more so as a player's coach, right, where he doesn't, where he doesn't normally, like, say a lot of negative stuff about the players, even though, like, I feel like on his way out of those teams, it seemed like he criticized them a little bit, but regardless, it is an upgrade. I feel like you still have to make some roster changes, right? So I don't think just a coaching change is necessarily gonna, completely change stuff. Um, obviously it was kind of interesting, right? They had already played a game. Rivers hasn't coached yet, right? It was the interim head coach, right? And you could see the vibes were very different, right? Because, it went viral how they were all doing their pregame dancing
Oh, yeah,
routines.
yeah.
Um, And I also think it's even more interesting, right? Because Adrian Griffin is the guy that Giannis wanted, right? That was the guy, that that he wanted the Bucks, I think to kind of hire, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
right? I know they said he didn't want Nick Nurse,
Yep.
because apparently, according to a lot of people, right, like he was kind of talking to people in Toronto, right, other players who had, who were coached under Nick Nurse, and they didn't seem to like him a whole lot, but also like they could have just been, in a rough spot because Toronto wasn't very good the last couple of years, and
Right.
I think they say his coaching style is kind of very kind of confrontational, I guess a little bit more old schoolish. Um, and again, like certain guys don't want to be coached that way. So, we'll see. I mean, like I said, I do think it's an upgrade. It's going to be kind of interesting with the All-Star game, right? Because, Doc Rivers, could be, I think I heard this like on one of the NBA radio shows. And like, they were saying like, yeah, Doc Rivers could be the All-Star game coach and he hasn't, played and he hasn't coached a single game
Hmm.
for the Bucks yet, right? Because, like the rules for the coaches is that it's the two teams with the best records. But if you already coached last year, you can't do it this year, right? So like the Celtics coach, right, Joe Mazzulla, he coached the Eastern team last year.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do it again this year because, that's just the rule. So it's
Right.
either going to be Bucks, right, which would be Doc Rivers, or it would be Nick Nurse, who Doc Rivers replaced, or I guess is who replaced Doc Rivers.
Yeah.
So kind of an interesting situation, but yeah, kind of what did you think about this situation, and ultimately, do you think it really changes a whole lot?
It's the weirdest thing ever. It's not the first time that we've seen it, though. I know a lot of people in the NBA media world have been talking about the parallels between this and David Blatt. I'm sure everybody knows the parallel to that, where the Cleveland Cavaliers went on to win the championship
Right.
after Ty Lue replaced Blatt.
And it was around this same time as well. I think it was like, mid late January,
Yeah,
and they had a similar record. I think the Cavs were 30-11.
first in
And
the
they had
East that year.
yeah, first in the East, right? And so you thought things were going great, and then they fired him.
Yeah, so I'm thinking it's more of like a difference of maybe styles, opinions, whatever the case may be. It just isn't working out. Also heard through NBA media as well. This is all over ESPN, and I wasn't even aware of this, that Doc Rivers was apparently an advisor or some guy who was basically aiding Griffin through his transitional period of becoming the head coach. So that is intriguing, and it seems like this may have been a setup of some sorts. I'm not gonna, say anything like that, but it is just kind of interesting that Doc Rivers just comes onto the scene randomly. But the firing is very odd. I know Shaq even last night was like, something's amiss. There's a little bit more to the story that I'm sure we don't know, and we probably will know later on, but just not right now.
We always get the information dump once guys get fired, and we
Exactly.
hear, all the stories about how terrible it was.
Exactly. So
So we already got some of that from Chris Haynes, in a way.
yeah, and I mean, the writing was kind of all over the walls. The defensive scheme wasn't there, like you were talking about. We don't need to relive the Bucks drama with them, kind of challenging their head coach, which is something that you don't normally see a lot. So I think Doc Rivers is an upgrade. Does it make me confident that they're going to win the championship? Not really, because I think we all know Doc Rivers' intriguing history with 3-1 leads, playoff collapses. I feel like he's kind of rode the coattails of his 2008 championship, but then that's not to take anything away from him. He's a great coach, but do I think he's willing to adapt to this modern NBA? I'm not too sure. So we'll see, but I do like that they kind of just pounced on the best available because, if we're being honest, Doc Rivers was the best available. And their only other option, I think. So
Right.
you do have to like that, but it does throw a lot of questions into the air. Now does Giannis have to take a step back from involving himself in stuff that, maybe he shouldn't be involved in like decisions and stuff? Because, this was his guy, apparently. And it was bad from the jump. Like you were saying, we got reports before the season started. Then as the season started, we saw the defensive collapses, the in-season tournament stuff. So, it was kind of destined to happen. That's why I'm not too up in arms about it or too surprised about it. And like I said, we've seen this before with other teams. But yeah, I mean, hey, hats off to Doc Rivers for getting another shot. And I think Adrian Griffin will get another shot as well, just due to the fact that their record is so good. I think he'll get another shot maybe sometime down the road, not this season, obviously, but I think later on in his coaching career, I think he'll probably resurface it. I don't think we've seen the last of him.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, like, some of these guys end up kind of have to like going through, an assistant run
Yep.
again, before they might get another opportunity. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
was so quick. I mean, like that's got to be like one of the fastest, that we've seen because like even with Blatt, right? Like he wasn't a rookie head coach because he had coached the year before. They
Sure.
went to the finals. They lost in six, but a lot of that was because of the injuries. In the finals that year, right? Because that was the one with where Kyrie and Love were out. Pretty much most of that
Mm-hmm.
series. So it wasn't like it was a shame like that you lost, and then they come back the next year, they looked better, and then they still ended up firing them. But again, like if your coach doesn't necessarily vibe with the guys in the locker room, then that's kind of when you got to go, right? Like
Did
if you lose the locker room, that's kind of the breaking point, right? Because like it's one thing to win games, but if guys just tune you out and no longer really are all that interested in what you got to say, I mean, you got a problem, and that's kind of the tough part of being a head coach because it's not just about X's and O's. You also have to be able to manage personalities and manage
Yeah.
egos as well. And that's like an even more important part when you're coaching a championship team with guys that are accomplished veterans in the league, right? Like, it's not like he's coaching, the Detroit Pistons, right? Or, like the Charlotte Hornets. You're coaching the Bucks, right? You're coaching Giannis, a guy who already has won a championship. So, I
Yeah.
mean,
And it was
that's the rough
interesting
part.
because I've been seeing some crazy clips like of Giannis, really mainly of Giannis, and it's just funny that he was kind of fighting his own guy. Where
Right.
they I think he subbed him out after some sort of turnover foul or something. And then he was like, I don't want to come out. And it's like, we've seen that before. But normally guys just go to the bench. They just sit there and be frustrated. But he sat at the scorer's table and pretty much was like, yeah, I'm not coming out. And then I also saw another one where Giannis was pretty much drawing up his own plays, which is kind of wild to think about. And then also I heard that Adrian Griffin also went into a presser or some sort of like locker room scrum or something like that and was talking about, yeah, Giannis changed the play for me. And it's like, I get it. You want to like boost up your guy, but at the same time, you shouldn't really be saying that because it makes you look incompetent. Where it's like,
Yeah.
you have your closers, you have Dame, sure. You have Middleton, who's also been a proven closer, but you just gotta be a little bit smarter. And I don't think he was very savvy in that regard. Navigating the media and like you were saying, navigating personalities, personnel as well. So hopefully he gets another shot because I don't think he was. It's not the worst thing that I've ever seen. It wasn't a complete poop show by any means. The defense was
Yeah.
bad, but I think he
Right.
deserves another opportunity.
Yeah. And I think also the defense, like, I mean, they don't have like a lot of great defensive players. I mean, it can be better for sure because we talked about like the effort like in transition, and all that other stuff. So like it can be better with effort, but I still
Yeah,
feel like the ceiling defensively is not that high, just because like who are the guys in the backcourt, who are the guys on the wings,
yeah,
that you're gonna close with to get stops, right? Because like obviously Lillard and Giannis. And I would imagine Middleton, right? Like those three are always going to be in the closing lineup for the most part. So then you got to choose between two other guys, right? And like, who are those two guys right now? Like, I mean, Jay Crowder, recently came back. I honestly kind of forgot he was on the team, and
yeah. Same.
and he had actually played a lot early in the season, but then he had that injury that kept him out for so long. Now he's back, but he was playing like 25 or something minutes a game.
Yeah,
And then like obviously Lopez is the center, and then like then you got Beasley and the other guard. So I feel like they also still need a little bit more. But I think the offense at the very least, should be good. But like I guess with Rivers, you could probably build a little bit more of a, I guess like a fluid offense because at times it kind of just felt like those two guys are just really good because we talked about right like why aren't they running as much pick and roll, like why are they kind of doing other stuff, which is fine, but like how come their two best players aren't playing through each other more, right? And like that's something that could be improved. Um so I think there's ways for it to be better. um but it's just a matter of like is it better enough? But then it's like at the same time, it's like your other competition I guess is Boston and Philly. And like Philly's been playing very well, right? And B dropped 70, which I guess we'll get to
yeah.
relatively soon. But it's like, do they necessarily scare you right now? I mean, like I know Boston's been great, but like if you're Milwaukee, like I mean, like we both think that Boston's the best, but like it's not impossible for Milwaukee to beat Boston.
You're right.
Just because we've seen them in the past. just have, interesting moments. So,
Sure.
but at the same time, like, I do think Rivers is an upgrade for sure, so it should help them. Like, I guess that's kind of the main thing that I'm trying to say. Like, it's not all coaching, but that's something that could be improved. And, I guess you got to also give credit to Milwaukee for recognizing like this isn't working. We need to make a change. And, because not a lot of teams would still do that, right? Like we've seen some teams do it in the past. Nate McMillan, right, for the Hawks, right? That was another one where they fired Lloyd Pierce and the Hawks were not very good. And then they brought in McMillan and then they made that conference finals run. So it's happened.
Yeah.
Um, but it's still not like something that happens a ton. So, because like normally, like, don't normally see that, right? Like, I mean, it's very rare. But either way, it's kind of a gutsy move, right? Because like we've seen in the past, right? Like, because I remember with Miami, right? When Spoelstra was first there, and the Heat were kind of like just okay, but not great. They were definitely underwhelming early on, right? And LeBron wanted Spoelstra gone, and Pat Riley was like, no, this is the guy. That we hired that we're gonna have, and you're just gonna have to, just be okay with it. And then they didn't fire him, and now he's the best coach in the NBA. So
Yeah. And I think it's intriguing how it's going to work, fit wise, because I know a lot of people have kind of gone back and forth on whether they think Doc Rivers is more of a offensive minded coach or more of a defensive minded coach. I've always thought that he's more of a defensive minded coach, so it would be intriguing to see what kind of adjustments he does, go after, especially during the deadline as well. That would be very intriguing. Maybe he'll have a say in the personnel that they could potentially get, because the thing is like you were saying, Doc Rivers is going to come to Milwaukee. Okay, cool, but that's not going to transform Damian Lillard and Malik Beasley into the most lockdown defender backcourt that we've ever seen in our lives. Like, it's all also on the players to defend better as well. Like, there's
right,
only but so much a scheme can do when you don't have the personnel to defend. So that's where I do have to give like Griffin some sort of credit. In terms of, the defense isn't necessarily all on him. But regardless, I think the Doc Rivers move is the best available move, and they swooped in and did it. And I think they've made a good decision as of right
right.
now.
Because that's what I think too. Because again, you just got to factor in who else is out there, right? Where you're like, we're short. This guy is for sure an upgrade. Because I mean, who else is out there? I mean, like that's the main thing. Because
Yeah.
most of them, if they were that great, they would have already been hired. So I
Yeah,
mean, like
and some of
a
them
lot
are
of those,
blackballed too. Like some
yeah,
people's names that you can't really speak. Like Mark Jackson. Like, I don't think he'll ever get another coaching job. You know what I mean?
no, he won't. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not even on the team anymore, I don't think so. So, uh, but yeah, so we'll see what happens as we as
Excuse
the
me.
Bucks as the Bucks season continues to go on. But yeah, not great for Adrian Griffin. So we'll see, what happens to him. But now next up we have another coach that was fired, Wes Unseld Jr., right, of your
Hmm.
team, the Washington Wizards. So their situation is different because they haven't hired a new coach. They're just going to use the interim head coach. I think, right. One of their assistants has been just
Yeah.
promoted right now, but like I don't think he's like the actual official head coach. Is he, or is it,
Um.
is it, or is
So
it interim?
so what I've heard is, they're promoting top assistant Brian Keefe, great assistant coach. He's been here a decent amount of time. And they're promoting him to interim coach for the rest of the season. So that's pretty much what I've heard. And they're just
Yeah,
going to look towards finding a replacement guy, in the offseason. But it's not like they completely fired and let go of Unseld Jr. He's going to be in the front office. So, not a complete, parting of the ways, I guess. But it should be intriguing. Um,
yeah, yeah.
I
He's in a
don't know.
front office advisor role, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, again, like, I mean, I'm, I guess I'm kind of surprised that it was like midway through the season, just
Hmm.
because like, what were the expectations here? I mean, I guess
Hmm.
like you could say they've been worse than you expected,
Hmm.
but I still feel like the ceiling probably wasn't that high. And it was also just interesting that like, um his contract they opted in with him or whatever. So they were gonna let him serve the last year of his contract and then they ended up, just firing him. But, at the same time I don't really feel like he was that great.
No.
Um so I mean, I've seen a couple of Wizards games in person as have you, right?
Yeah.
And it did not look that great. And like because like even last year, right? Like you had some talent, right? With like what was it like Beal, Porzingis, Kuzma. I know Beal missed a ton of time.
Yeah.
And they initially started the season off fine, and then it
Hmm.
just kind of devolved. And I know Beal was also hurt, so that didn't help. either. So I don't know, but we'll see who they replace. I mean, obviously, also then we factored in because we talked about this at the time when they got that new front office, right? Like that wasn't a guy that they hired, so
Yeah.
it wasn't like we expected him to be around for the long haul. We kind
No.
of assumed that he was probably a guy that was going to be, let go. And
And
that's
that's how you
kind of
got
the
to
rough
feel with
thing.
the whole roster, honestly. That's how you got to feel
Right,
about
and
it.
that's kind of the rough thing about being, like a head coach, like, initially starting off with like a bad roster. Because, like, if you struggle for multiple seasons, you're probably not going to last. But at the same time, like, you don't necessarily have enough talent to really be all that great. I mean, I still feel like even without talent, there's like sort of like baseline level evaluations that you can make of a coach. Like, what is the system like? What are the schemes like? Obviously, like you said, you may not have the personnel, but like if you understand X's and O's and concept, and if you're, like good in terms of like managing people, managing egos or whatever, being a leader in the locker room and all that, that's always cool. But, still, I mean, but at the same time, like it didn't feel like it was that great. But
Yeah.
like I said, in fairness, I don't know like what the ceiling of that Wizards team is, but either way, right, they're headed in a rebuild. So like, like you said, lots of players could be gone as well, right? Like this Wizards team could look relatively different by the deadline because there's definitely guys on the roster
Yeah.
that could get moved.
Yeah. And in regards to Unseld, I've never really been a fan of him as a head coach. I thought he was a very good assistant coach in Denver. But I know that he means a lot to the city, a lot to the organization. Obviously his father played for the Wizards on the title team, so you do have to give him that. And I think it is kind of a sad thing, but at the same time, you do have to really agree with the coaching change. 7-37 is pretty bad, like you were saying. The roster would only give you about that much, honestly. But even in years past, you kind of expect the roster to be or not the roster, but the team to be a little bit better. Because, like you were saying, the team had promise last year, and I think the year before that. So, because this is what 2.5 years. I think he had a 2.5 year tenure. So, he had some time, and I think that he showed what he kind of had, and it just wasn't really it. So we'll see, what his future holds in Washington. I'm glad that he's still in the organization because you can't ignore that he does have somewhat of an eye for talent, somewhat of, a basketball mind. I think he, does have those qualities, but it just didn't really translate. I just don't think, he probably had the locker room completely on his side too, because it seems like guys are kind of just doing whatever they want. Like I said about Washington, after the first 10 games that I saw, they kind of look like an exhibition team where it's like, you're just out here, you just want to prove your worth, see if you have any value in free agency. If you don't, you get to stay. If you do, you're probably gone, for the right
Yeah,
price. So that's
yeah,
kind
LA,
of the vibe that I get from
yeah,
Washington.
yeah. It looked like a LA Fitness,
Hmm.
DC, pickup gym type
Yeah,
of environment. I mean,
honestly.
you know, yeah, it was interesting. But we'll see where they go from here because again, like they're gonna be moving to Alexandria right at the end of the decade, and then
Yeah,
obviously they're in a rebuild, so they're in this for the long haul. So it'll be interesting to see where they go.
yeah.
Um,
Definitely made the right pick with Bilal, all that stuff. I've heard the rumors with Kuzma have kind of dwindled out. Apparently, they're not too like they're hesitant on moving him, but he is bringing in some calls, and then obviously Jordan Poole. That's a whole nother story. Probably one for the off season, honestly, but it ain't looking too good in Washington. But change is change, and I think this was one of the first changes that needed to be made coming from a Wizards fan.
yeah. All right. Next up, we have a 70-point game once again. This time it's Joel Embiid, right, against the San Antonio Spurs, right? Greg Popovich, before the game said we're gonna hammer him. We're gonna hammer his you know what.
Hmm.
And he dropped 70 points on Wenbanyama, and it was a very smooth, 70 points, right? 70 points, 18 rebounds, 5 assists, 1 steal, 1 block, 24 41 from the field, so 58.5%. Just 1 3, right? One of two from three. Um, Very dominant performance. Again, like it's kind of interesting with this Sixers team, right? Where it's like, it's feels like, Embiid has gotten better every year. This is the best we've seen. And like Nick Nurse has optimized him in certain ways where it feels like, they've kind of figured out some of, kind of minimizing some of his weaknesses. Again, we'll see what it looks like come playoff time. But again, like, I mean, shout out to him because again, like he's had a great year, right? Because again, he won MVP last year, been even better this year. If he can stay healthy, he's got a very good shot at winning it. Although he's got some very stiff competition, from some other guys. But I mean, like talk to me about this performance. At you being the resident Joel Embiid stan,
Yeah.
what would
No, right. Um. Obviously, you can't ignore the greatness. It's amazing. I do have to disagree with you on one thing. I don't think, I know you weren't saying all 70 points were on Wembanyama because
you're right?
from what I saw,
Yeah,
it was mostly Embiid versus Zach Collins. I will say,
I know.
Embiid gave him, some buckets,
I was
obviously.
being
I
Yeah, I
know.
was being funny.
Yeah, yeah.
What was up, guy? Sohan. It was
Yeah,
Sohan that also guarded him a lot,
yeah, so
which
it's like the competition ain't that good, but 70 points nonetheless is pretty wild. We've seen, some 70-point outings and we always show
right
love to those. But
three in the last year.
yeah, and with this guy, his game is refined. Like you said, this is the most refined I think we've seen Embiid. He's very efficient, shooting the three ball very well. Limiting kind of I mean, like the turnovers are still there, but they just don't look as goofy and as bad as they
Right.
used to.
And his assists are way up.
Exactly. So you got to feel good about that, especially if you're a Philly fan. But it is intriguing. I think this game alone will probably solidify and cement his case for MVP. I don't think anybody else is going to do anything that's going to be able to top this in the regular season. I could be wrong. Shea might drop 80 or something. I don't know, but I'm just kidding. But I don't think he's going to do that. But you know, Embiid, I think he's done it. I think he's probably won MVP with this game. It was kind of wild to watch. The mid range is there. He was kind of just bullying people down low, doing his thing. So, I think he's proven that he's arguably the best center in the league. I think it's more so Jokic, but definitely the best center in the East. No contest over there. And you can't really hate on it. There's nothing for me to really hate on, which is surprising because normally I'd find a way to nitpick. I know, a lot of stuff, a lot of free throws, but what's new with the free throw merchant? But regardless, it is kind of interesting that, where they sit in the standings, considering, what's been going on, but he's been on a tear, it's kind of wild. It's honestly scary. And I'm not sure, if there's going to be a counter. Maybe the only counter is, the playoffs. Hopefully, us Philly haters can, hope for another fizzle out, as I normally do. But hey, I mean, you can't really hate on it, honestly.
I mean, because they had won six in a row. I think they just lost to the Pacers, but before
Yeah.
that, they had won six in a row.
Hmm.
So they're the three seed in the East. Very close to Milwaukee. Right, I think Milwaukee has two more wins, and Philly has one more loss, and Milwaukee's played I think a game or two more,
Yeah.
than Philadelphia. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes up. But I think we can kind of assume that that's probably going to be the 2 and 3 seed, right? One of those two. And so that means that they're going to end up playing each other in the second round. And that's going to be really intriguing to see, right? Because again, like both teams have a guy, right, that like you don't really have much of an answer for if you're the other team, right? Like
Yeah.
you don't have a great answer for Giannis. You don't really have a great answer for Embiid, for most teams. So I
Hmm.
mean, obviously the Bucks have some size in the front court, with Giannis and Lopez and I guess Bobby Portis, but still, like I mean, Embiid is Embiid, so that's
Yeah.
and the pairing between him and Maxi has been great this year.
Yeah.
They still have some flexibility, so there's the potential for them to improve and make a move. At the deadline, if they can grab one of those kind of like smart, kind of tough veteran guys, maybe you don't have to go star hunting, but if you can add some veteran pieces, to come off the bench or whatever, or play a significant role, like if they could get like a Bruce Brown or
Yeah.
somebody like that, that could probably be, something that would be really helpful for them. So, we'll see. But yeah, like but it also is just crazy how we've had 3 70-point games in the last year,
Yeah.
right? Because I mean, that's the other thing, right? Like, I mean, 70 was like, for a long time, 70 was a point total that was not very easy to get to. I mean, Devin Booker did it, however many years ago that
Yeah.
was. Obviously Kobe had 81,
Hmm.
right? But outside of that, right? Like, I mean, we didn't think guys would be getting to 70, but we're here now, right?
Yeah,
And
because
like,
what? It was Dame and what? Donovan Mitchell, I think, right?
yeah, and it was last year, and we talked
Yeah.
about both of them, and it's
Yeah.
just Yeah, like not that they are unlikely sources. It's just like because like those guys can get hot. Um, I mean, I would have personally just felt like it would have been like more realistic for Lillard to get to 70 than Mitchell.
Sure.
Um, but at the same time, like both of them got it, and like Embiid also got it as well.
Yeah.
And we even had another game, scoring wise, although this one did not go the way that you probably would have wanted it to if you were
Yeah.
that team, and that was the Minnesota Timberwolves, right? With Karl Anthony Towns, he had 44 in the first half. Like I think Embiid had like 36 something at halftime,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like 34, 36. Towns had 44 at halftime. He had like 58 through three. I think he had 60, 62, and like he had like what 4 points, to begin the fourth,
Yeah.
and then he just kind of sold. I mean, like
Yeah.
he stat pad, he took some bad shots, 4 shots. I know there were a couple of possessions, especially one like right at the end where like they probably should have called a foul, but it still shouldn't have gotten to that point. I think Edwards had like 0 points through like most of the game. I think he was playing through an illness,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken. But it was just one of those like just this is like the old Minnesota Timberwolves where they just kind of like find a way to just clown around and fool around and lose a game that they shouldn't have lost. They were up by 18 at one point in the
Yeah.
third quarter quickly, and then it got whittled down just like that, right? Terry Rozier, hitting threes. We'll talk about him momentarily, right? He was hitting threes. I think Brandon Miller hit some shots, right?
Yeah.
LaMelo Ball came alive in the fourth quarter. Bridges, I think, hit a couple shots, but like just bad. I mean, and they lost to Oklahoma City, a week or so ago, or however long it was. It wasn't that long ago. I think it was whatever day, the football playoff
Yeah.
games were.
I think it was literally a week ago.
Right. So now they're at a point where like the one seed is like kind of up for grabs now. Where like now Oklahoma City technically is number one in the Western Conference. I think Minnesota just won right against the Nets, so I think they are technically like half a game ahead. But Oklahoma City has the tiebreaker, and then Denver's not far behind. They just lost to they got destroyed by the Knicks, so who have also been on a tear as of late. So,
Yeah.
but the Towns one, yeah, that was bad. Like it was, I mean, it's kind of hard for me to say like this is like one of the worst 60-point games I've ever seen because like you scored 60 in a game. But just the fact that like down the stretch, it was pretty clear he was kind of just like trying to, just like put up some shots and get some numbers. Like, yeah, I don't know. That was just not a great look. And they benched him at one point late in the fourth where he just kind of, he was sat and then they put him back in eventually because they needed some offense because they couldn't score. And Minnesota's offense has been not that great as of late. I mean, it hasn't been great for a good chunk of the season. They've still been able to win a lot of games because they have the number one defense, but
Yeah.
they're still like 19th, 20th offensively. Mike Conley wasn't in that game, and I think
Yeah.
that's a factor as well because he's kind of like a stabilizing guy when he's not out there. They don't really have any other like point guard facilitating type guys. Like Edwards can make plays for others, but he's a scorer. He's
Yeah.
not really initially looking to make the pass. He did in that game because he had a career high in assists. Against the Hornets, but also like he couldn't score for most of the game either.
Yeah.
Um, so that's something where I think it'll be interesting to see, if Minnesota kind of looks to make some type of small move, to get like like another backup point guard or just like some Mike Conley insurance. Cause, again, he's an older guy, so you can't always necessarily expect him to be, just Mr. Reliable. So, I mean, but
Yeah.
either way, like, yeah, that was not great. I did not, that one was, that one kind of, I almost just kind of basically started laughing at the end because it was just so ridiculous.
Yeah, it felt a little meaningless to me, when I was watching. I was like, okay, you scored 62 and you lost. Like, that's a moment where it's like, when you're trash talking in 2K and it's somebody on a different team and you just tell them scoreboard, honestly, because it's like you literally lost the game. But, 62 nonetheless is an impressive feat. I'll give him that.
Yes.
But, geez, yeah, not the prettiest one. Like you said, it pretty much turned into the, Carl Towns show. And then, yeah, that isn't necessarily the best show on TV. I'm not going to lie to you. So it was intriguing to watch it, but you could definitely see there are some maturity issues on the squad for sure. And even the coach called it out. It was ugly. It wasn't very good. But they did kind of bounce back against the Wizards. Nonetheless, it is the Wizards, so they kind of stink.
Yeah.
But regardless, hey, you can't lose to the Hornets, in my opinion, if you were, the Minnesota pretty much fully healthy. I know, like you said, Mike Conley wasn't present, but, that shouldn't equal a loss in my opinion. And Towns had a decent game. Didn't shoot very well from three against the Wizards, but then Anthony Edwards definitely did bounce back. So it seems like they're kind of a flip. They're going through a stretch where they seem to be a little bit flip floppy. I don't know if that's just maybe fatigue or, maybe they just feel like they're in the driver's seat. I don't think they're there yet. I think they've played very well through this season, but I don't think, it's time to take your foot off the gas. You need to be pedal to the metal and just keep plowing on through. But regardless, the Towns thing, it was definitely a lapse of judgment, I think, on his part. And I think he let his ego get in the way of a win. And that's unfortunate because it could cost them, the 1 seed, like you were saying.
Yeah, so we'll see. But yeah, that wasn't great.
Yeah.
So now I guess we'll get into, the trade, right? So we had another trade happen. And this one was Scary Terry Rozier of Charlotte,
Mm-hmm.
right? Going to the Miami Heat, Kyle Lowry, and a 2027 first round pick, right? So future first from Miami, and Kyle Lowry going to Charlotte. And, I'm going to assume Lowry, they'll probably look to trade him, which I don't think they're going to be able to trade him. So that probably means they're going to buy him out. Um, Interestingly enough, with the buyouts, we've talked about it before, right? Where like, due to the new CBA, if you're in the second apron, you can't sign guys that make more than 12 million before they get bought out, right? So that means
Yeah.
teams like Boston, teams like Phoenix, teams like I think Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken, right? Golden State, I think, is another one. So, some of the teams that are, kind of looking to do some stuff, they won't be able to get, his services. But regardless, I guess we can look at it. We'll look at it from the Heat's perspective first because I think that's the one that's,
Yes.
kind of a little bit more imminent, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously it's an upgrade over Kyle Lowry, right? Lowry is, was a very good player. But at the same time now he is older, so he's no longer the same guy. On either end of the floor, right? Obviously offensively, right? You don't expect much from him at this point. And then even defensively, right? He's not the same guy because he's small, he's a little slower. Still strong, still physical, still smart. Um, but regardless, either way, it's an upgrade, and I think it's. But it also at the same time, it's kind of a different look as well, right? Rozier is a very different point guard from Lowry, right? Lowry is, I guess like in his prime he could score, but I feel like he also was relatively comfortable with like running the offense and like setting guys up, getting guys different looks, right? When he first signed with the Heat, right, they kind of talked about like he'll help them in transition because even though he doesn't run, he looks to push the ball up in transition to kind of help set guys up. Rozier is more like a scorer, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's more like, put the ball in my hands. I'm gonna get you guys a bucket. He's more athletic, right? He's faster. Um, he can shoot off the dribble. So it's definitely a different look. Obviously he's played a couple of games. The first one against the Grizzlies, um, he came off the bench, which is fine because I'm assuming they didn't want to mess up the flow of the rotation too much. And they let him close. And then against the Celtics, right, he started. They lost both games. Interestingly enough, they lost to the Grizzlies, which is not great because that's the G League Grizzlies.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yeah.
they got destroyed by Boston. Porzingis got a sprained ankle, so we'll see what happens with that. Keep an eye on that, right? Because that's a guy that if you're Boston, you don't want to lose for a long stretch because they need him. Um, but either way, I mean, like it's something where it's like it's such a like low risk move where it's like I mean you're getting a guy who's an upgrade. And like the Heat probably needed to do something, right? Obviously they lost out on Damian Lillard. So that was obviously an L, right? Because that was the guy that they courted, and that was the guy he wanted to go there. They didn't get him. He went to a rival in the same conference, which makes it worse. Obviously Rozier is no Damian Lillard, right? Not even close in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
he's not Lillard. Let's get that straight. But he is a guy that I think could help them. He's also small like Lowry, so there's going to be certain spots defensively where he's probably going to get targeted. I think in Boston he was a good defender. I think that also, it also helped that he was around other good defenders as well, right? In Charlotte, it's not like he was playing next to a lot of defensive-minded guys.
Yeah.
And also he didn't have quite as much offensive responsibility in Boston either,
Yeah.
right?
He
Like he
barely had any until like
right,
2018.
right, like Tatum, Brown, because I think when he played the most, right, that was the year that Kyrie and Hayward were hurt. So it was like Tatum, Brown, Smart, Horford. all those guys.
Yeah.
So I mean, uh, like I'd like it for Miami, fine, right? I don't know if it makes them significantly better, mainly just because like like he's good, but I mean I don't know. I
Hmm.
mean like we'll have to kind of see how it goes. But either way, like you do this if you're the Heat, um, it doesn't make you worse at all, right? So like but it also is kind of interesting because it doesn't seem like a move Miami would normally do, right? Because like normally we hear about them like always trying to chase stars, right? Like Donovan Mitchell, obviously Lillard, and others in the past, right? But Rozier, is in a different tier. Um, but either way, we've talked about it in the past with these other teams, right? Like if you're gonna do a move, like there's no shame in doing like a move like this where it's like you know. Is this the difference between us, winning a title? Probably not. But does this make us better? Absolutely, right? And like you didn't have to do really much of anything, right? Like you're not giving up a core rotational guy, right? You're not giving up Bam, you're not giving up, Butler or anything like that. You're giving up Lowry, right? Like, and he was coming off the bench the last few games anyway, so you probably kind of felt that like at a certain point he's gonna probably be on the way out. Um, anyway. So I mean, we'll see, what happens. But obviously they've lost their first couple of games. But I think like also he's probably gonna, it's gonna take a little bit of time for him to get comfortable within Miami's system, right? Because it's very different from what he was doing in Charlotte, right? Because Charlotte was a lot more, I guess I don't know if disorganized is the right word, but it's just very different, right? Like Lamelo Ball has the ball in his hands, although he missed a lot of time this year. But they also don't have the same talent, so it's just like it's a lot. In Miami. There's more structure. There's more organization, and that can help some of those type of guys, right? Because like he can do some stuff outside of the system, but like also now he's in a structured offense where like his role is easier to define, and like he knows the things that he's gonna have to do. So I'm cool with it for the Heat. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love it for the Heat, and Terry's having pretty much a career
Having a
year. Yeah,
yeah,
he's having a career year. He's putting up 23 points per game. I'm sure that'll go down on the Heat. I just don't think he's gonna be that kind of guy on the Heat. I think he's gonna be more of a microwave, get in there, and then come out, because like you said, his defensive impact probably isn't going to be too crazy, and he's not going to be setting people up like that on the Heat. But I think the scoring will be there. I think the 3-point shooting will be there, and I think that's something that the Heat definitely need. So we'll be intriguing because I think Terry's been one of the more underrated players this year, and that's just because he's on Charlotte. They don't get a whole lot of attention. But yeah, you've got to love the move. I think they only gave up a protected first
right.
round pick and Kyle Lowry. I mean that's a
That
steal,
yeah,
That's the perfect trade off in my opinion. So
yeah. That's why.
you do have to feel good about it, 100%.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, yeah, I think this is good. This is a good move for the Heat.
Yeah.
Because again, like, yeah, you didn't get Lillard. Rozier is no Damian Lillard,
Mm-mm.
but it's probably still better than what you had. So,
Yeah.
and like, if and that may be one of the only available moves right now because
Hmm.
we still don't know like which guys are going to be out on the trade market, and of the ones that are, we don't necessarily know if Miami's going to be able to get those guys, right?
Right.
Just depending on who, because they can only move certain guys. They're also a team that, even though I know they talk about like the grit and grind, heat culture, or whatever, but they also have a very expensive roster.
Yeah.
So there's certain types of moves that they can't necessarily make either, because of the limitations that they put on themselves with it. So,
Yeah.
like I said, I like the move, and I think it makes them better. I don't necessarily know if I would say I'm ready for them to move up a tier.
No,
I would
they're
need to
still the same
I
tier.
yeah, I would need to wait and see. I mean, because the main issue is the offense has just been so rough, for them, right? Because like their record is good, but like you just know like at a certain point there's a ceiling to it because the offense was just kind of mediocre.
Yeah.
Um, obviously, they've had so many games where like certain guys have been in and out of the lineup, right? Like Jaquez, their rookie, has been playing great, but now he's hurt, right? And he's missed the last few games, and we don't know when he'll be back.
Mhm.
And that's a guy that's now turned into an important rotational piece for them,
Yeah.
just because of the versatility he brings there. So they have a lot of different guys. So I do feel like come playoff time, they're going to be one of those like dangerous teams where it's like you don't really want to play them in the first round because, if you kind of like, I don't know, if you kind of like get caught sleeping a little bit, they could probably do some real damage, I think, in
Just
some
like
of those
last
games.
year.
Yeah, exactly. Just like last year. So, like, I'm not going to count them out. Like, I don't expect them to make another finals run. But I think at the very least, if they can get hot at the right time, they could give a real scare to some of those, higher seeded teams where it's like, oh man, we're like the three, seed, or we're the 4 seed and they're like the 5, 6 seed, and like, they're giving us like a 7 game, grind it out, down to the last possession type of series, and maybe they come out on top because we've seen them be able to really pull off, like you said, some wild upsets. Because, like you said, we saw it last year.
Yep,
So,
absolutely.
and then from Charlotte's perspective, right, it gets them off of, Rozier's contract, which is relatively long term. Right now, this frees up a lot of cap space for them, right? I believe they're going to have like, what is it, like 50+ million in cap, right? Because Hayward's contract will come off the books. Lowry's contract will come off the books, right? Both guys are basically making like 30 million. So, I mean, they're basically committed to, like, rebuilding and reshaping the roster now, right? Like, now it's new ownership. So they're ready to kind of move on, from some of these other guys, right? Which makes sense because it was time. We knew at a certain point they were going to probably need to do something. We just weren't necessarily sure when, right? But now it feels like it makes sense. I don't expect either Lowry or Hayward to be traded. My guess is that, like, they're probably going to get bought out
Yeah.
because I just think because their salaries, they just make so much money, right? Where it's like, who has like 30 million in salary they can just move just to get Gordon Hayward or Kyle Lowry.
Yeah.
I just don't see that happening.
It's
I
not
know
worth it.
yeah, I know the GM for the Hornets, Mitch Kupchak, right? I think he said something like, yeah, Lowry's not going to play until after the trade deadline or something like that, right?
Right.
Which basically means like we're waiting until, we get, we get confirmation that, like, oh, you can get bought out, or like, oh, somebody's
Yeah.
not going to trade you or whatever. Like, but I don't know. Like, I don't expect either of those guys to be traded. I expect them to be bought out. Um, I guess, you know, we'll start off with the buyout thing first, right? Like,
Hmm.
what what teams do you see like could be a good fit for those two guys? Because they're older-ish vets. I mean, Lowry is older. I guess Hayward's older as well. Neither guy is what they once were, right? Like, you probably don't want them starting on a
Heck
team.
no, 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 no.
Yeah, but they could probably be serviceable role players coming off the bench. They've been in some big, moments, particularly Lowry, right, who was on a championship team and has been in, on multiple playoff teams that have made deep runs. Um, so, I guess, yeah, like, what is the fit for, those guys? Keeping in mind that there are certain teams that cannot sign them.
Yeah. I mean, it would be kind of intriguing to see them go to contenders. I think they both do deserve that at the very least. I don't think, they're going to go to any bum teams or anything like that. I don't know where Philly, stands on things, but I think they would be an intriguing team to see, pick up one of these guys. I don't think Golden State can't, right?
No, they cannot
Yeah,
because
that's
they're
what I
in the
thought.
same.
Yeah, so honestly, really just Philly, honestly. It would be intriguing to see them target either one. I think they should probably target Hayward maybe more than Lowry, but who knows? I think they should be definitely one of the top snipers, I guess, for the buyout market.
Yeah, because that's the thing. I mean, Philly will have the flexibility to make a trade.
Hmm.
But then there's like other guys on the roster where, like, maybe they might, like, that make like very little money, where it's like, well, we got a better guy than this guy, so we could like move this guy so that way we can open up a roster spot,
Yeah,
or something
exactly.
like that. And that's when they can kind of like swoop in and get one of those buyout guys. Yeah, and I think that makes sense because,
Yeah.
again, they need a little bit, extra, in terms of like some other veteran guys, that have been in some big series that could help
Yeah.
them, that could help them out. So I think that's honestly, I think, makes a lot of sense. Obviously with buyout guys, there's always, like, the three reasons where it's like, money, right? Playing time,
Hmm.
opportunity, right? And
Yeah,
like, depending on the order, that's gonna kind of determine where these guys want to go, right? Like,
for sure.
if you get bought out and you want to just play somewhere else, like, and still play a lot of minutes, right? Then, like, that choice might be different than if you're like, I just want to go to a team that's got a chance to win a title,
Yeah.
right? Like, say Kevin Love last year when he was bought out, he went to Miami, and there were other teams he could have gone to that were better, but he wasn't playing at all in Cleveland, and he was playing a lot for Miami, including starting.
Yeah.
And they actually ended up going to the finals as well. I mean, they didn't win, but they had the opportunity to because they were in the finals.
Yeah.
Now he's there, right? So I mean, that's a situation where, like, then you have other guys that get bought out where they just want to be on like another team that's got a chance to, contend, right, and win a title, right? Where it's like they know they're probably not going to play a whole lot, but they're just going to be on the team so that way, like, hey, I have a chance to be on a team that wins a championship, right? Like, I think it was Dragic, right, last year, I think, or
Hmm.
whatever. He was on the Bucks. I
Yeah.
think he didn't really play at
Hmm.
all, but he was on the roster.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and it's like,
yes,
with this Charlotte stuff, I think this is the beginning of, maybe a soft rebuild where it's like they kind of just get rid of everybody but LaMelo, and Brandon Miller and maybe some other guys on the team as well. Um, so, hey, I think this is a good start though, because you are getting back some future assets, lottery protected pick in 2027,
right.
and then that becomes unprotected, I think, in 2028. So,
Right, because if you're Charlotte, like you're not, you're like we've kind of learned now that they're not really in a position to like be a roster that's super expensive because they're just
yeah.
not good enough.
Yep.
And I think, like you said, this is where they have the opportunity to kind of reset. Where like some of these guys are probably going to be gone, right? Like I assume Lamelo will stay, Brandon
Mhm.
Miller will stay because he's been
Mhm.
great as a rookie. Mark Williams, right? He's been good,
Oh
although
yeah,
he's been
yeah.
hurt season. He's missed a ton of time, but I would assume he's probably not a guy they're looking to move. But some of these other guys, right? Like people have been talking about Miles Bridges, PJ Washington, Nick Richards, I think. Where like those are guys that could probably be, on their way out,
Book Knight.
depending. Yeah, yeah. I don't think they're gonna get much back for that guy because
No.
I don't think he's in the same tier as those guys because I
Mm-mm.
just don't think he's that good. But regardless,
Just
yeah,
names that
Charlotte.
are on the way out.
Yeah, Charlotte's got, some more flexibility now in terms of the options that they could, look towards, right? Because again, like they should be a team that should be a seller at the deadline because they're not good. And like there's no reason for them to not try to move off of some of these guys, especially if they don't feel like they factor in much to their long-term, future plans, right?
Yeah.
And that's the interesting part. Like say with a guy like Bridges, he had that situation, so he ended up not getting the max deal, right? So now he's like, he's on the qualifying offer, so he doesn't have bird rights or whatever, right? So that means that like they may not be able to. I mean, now they have cap space, but like so they could re-sign him if they wanted to, but you are in a situation where he could just go somewhere else that has cap space, right? Like if he thinks that there's like a situation that's better, he could just go there, right? Like he could say like I'm gonna go to Detroit and I'm
Yeah.
gonna play there. And they're gonna have the cap space to be able to just sign him. And so like if you feel like you should move him, you should. Same with like Nick Richards, who they paid a relatively small contract, but still, or PJ Washington, any of these other guys. So I'm curious to see if we'll see any other Charlotte moves and see like what those returns are, right? Maybe more expiring contracts and like future first. We'll see. Um, but either way, I think it's a kind of one of those win-win trades for both teams, which I feel like that's what we've mainly seen
Yeah.
as of late. I don't think we've seen any trades so far that have been like, oh, this trade was awful for this team, right? Like, we can talk about the Siakam return being kind of like, but at the same time, like you combine that with Anunoby and then it's fine. You know what I
Yep.
mean? So
Absolutely.
and it's also interesting just how like, the trades have happened earlier than we've seen as of late, right?
Mhm.
Which I kind of wonder, like, is that just what teams are doing for one reason or another, right? Like, or maybe it's like some of these teams that are trying to win games, they don't want to just wait until the deadline. They want to do something now, right? So that way, like, they can, kind of figure out what they're going to do with more time left. Because the issue
Yeah.
with the trade deadline is it doesn't give you much time, in terms of like, between that point and the end of the season, right? Because I mean, February 8th is the trade deadline. So a lot of these teams probably have like a good, I don't know, like 6, 7, 8 games, left before the trade deadline, right? I mean, it's the 25th, that as we're recording, right? So if you're playing, every other day or so, you might have played like 6, 7 games. So I mean, that's when we get to like 50-ish games. So you got like 30 games left. So
Yeah.
that's
Bless
where,
you.
yeah, thanks. So that might be where we're headed. And hopefully we do get more trades because, they're always fun to talk about. Hopefully we'll have some left for the live stream. We'll see. But,
Yeah.
regardless,
I
um,
think we will. I think it'll be pretty eventful. It may not be like, crazy names or anything, but I think there'll be a lot of moves.
right. And now, now we're going to get into the all-star starters, right? So these were announced, a couple hours before we got on to record.
Mhm.
Um, And in terms of the list, right? I don't think it's really, all that surprising, right? I mean, you look at the starting five, in the West, right? It's Luca, SGA, LeBron, Durant, Jokic. We talked about like there may be like one or two guys, right, that get in, where it's like it's the fan vote. But this is where the fan, player, and media vote kind of balances it out, right? Because like say we expected like maybe like we both had Luca and SGA as our guards for the All-Star starters in the West.
Yeah.
But we also acknowledge like it's possible that like, somebody else like a Steph, could get in also because of the fan vote. But, the fan vote wasn't really like all that skewed towards him, right? Like
Right.
Luca got the most guard votes. I think SGA was third, right? If
Mm-hmm.
I'm not mistaken. But it was close between him and Steph. And, there was enough player and media votes from SGA to push him over the top.
Yeah.
And then, like what I mentioned with LeBron, right? Where like LeBron, like, because you made the case for AD, being the all-star starter. And I said like LeBron would probably still get in also because of the fan vote. And
Yes.
also because like he would be like, 20th consecutive all-star, starter or whatever it is. So,
Yep.
that makes sense, right? And then in the East, right, you had Halliburton, Lillard, Giannis, Tatum, and Embiid, right?
Yep.
And I think yeah, and I think I had Brunson, you had
Yeah.
Lillard, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, so your East was closer, my West was closer, but regardless, like I mean, all the names that we mentioned will still probably end up being reserves that weren't starters, anyways. But
Yeah. And I
pretty
heard with
much like
Dame and Brunson, I think, it was like a tie
right,
between the two of them, like all around, which is kind of wild. But I think the tiebreaker was apparently fan votes. So
yeah,
Damian
it
Lillard
was
had a little bit more fan votes than Brunson.
right,
But I think
because I
Brunson was obviously robbed for sure.
right because that was who I had as
Yeah.
the other guard starter next to Halliburton because I
Mm-hmm.
think um with the fan vote, Brunson was like in the third return, he was like almost like 800,000 votes behind Lillard.
Yeah.
Because it was funny because Trey Young, I think, was second in the third return for the guard votes. He was
Mm-hmm.
second, but obviously Lillard would have had the edge. I'm assuming in terms of like player and media vote, ahead of Trey Young.
Yeah.
So I mean, it makes sense. I mean, like generally speaking, like when you're a top whatever seed, you're probably gonna have, one or two starters in the All Star group. Like Oklahoma City does. I mean, I guess Minnesota doesn't have any starters, but like also like I don't think those guys are quite as well known
No.
to everybody as some of the other guys. I mean, I guess SGA you wouldn't think would be as well known, but also Oklahoma City has a very has like a very significant fan base. Like
Yeah.
even though it's like
SGA
a
has a
small
cult following. Right now, I'm telling you, like a lot of like young kids, especially, like they really, really like SGA's game and all that stuff. Like he's literally the TikTok hooper.
yeah, so yeah, so right, so but yeah, but I mean, like again, all these guys, I think you can easily make the case that they should all be there for the most part. I mean, because again,
For
like
sure.
we talked about the guards, right? Because like we had our list where it's like this is who we think should be there based off of like how they're playing and all that other stuff, versus like who people want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
I think this makes a lot of sense, right? Um, because again, like you look at Luca and SGA. I mean, the Mavs have kind of fallen off since then, but Luca is also still a very popular player. And then with SGA, obviously he's being rewarded for being a 1 seed or 2 seed or whatever. So
Yeah.
I think this makes a lot of sense. It'll be interesting to see who the reserves are. Because the good news is like those guys will still get in. But like you said, the snub game is always kind of funny because like I feel like people always say like that somebody got snubbed, but then they don't ever want to say like who should be replacing them. I guess because they
Right.
don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. Where like sometimes like you'll see a player say like this guy got robbed, and then it's like all right, well then who should be coming off that list, and then
Right.
we
Yeah.
see them provide an answer for that. So,
Sure.
but
Did
it's
you have
always
any
fun.
robberies? Because the only robbery that I really saw was Brunson being a starter. Honestly, like
Yeah,
I think
I mean,
Brunson definitely deserves to be a starter over Lillard, just based off numbers.
yeah, I mean that's what I had on my list. I had Brunson. So
Yeah.
I mean, outside of that, yeah, I mean, like I said, you could also make the case that AD could have been in it over LeBron. I mean, I don't know,
But I mean,
like I
it's
don't know.
Braun, bro.
I mean, yeah, I don't feel like robbery is the same, but
No.
like yeah,
No.
but like I think Brunson is probably the one. Just but at the same time, like the Bucks because they have the 2 seed and because those two guys are so popular and so well respected, they're gonna get in there. Like I mean, it's not
Yeah.
really a surprise.
No.
So now we're pretty much gonna get into news and rumors, to close out the episode, right? Obviously we've talked about some of these trades, and rumors in the past before. Obviously, you just mentioned Lowry with Philly, right? And they mentioned like Kyle Lowry, Bruce Brown among Sixers targets. Again, those two guys make a lot of sense because those two guys are tough-minded guys. Bruce Brown obviously more in his prime than Lowry.
Hmm.
But Lowry again was probably a buyout guy. I don't think he's a guy they trade for. Bruce Brown they could trade for. And you could probably just put together a couple of those expirings, right? Like maybe you throw in, I don't know, like KJ Martin, or maybe you put in like Marcus Morris, or a couple of those guys. I mean, Bruce Brown makes 22 million, which is more than probably what he really is as a player.
Yeah.
But then that's going to be the interesting thing, right? Because he has a team option, and you could see a situation, right, where like a team trades for him, likes him, and then they just like opt out of his team option and then just sign him to a long-term deal that's like less money per year.
Sure.
you know. But then at the same time, if it doesn't work out, then it's like, oh man, like you got to opt in and pay this guy 20 whatever million. So we'll see. But again, I think if you could get those two guys for Philly, that would be a really good grab. Just because again, you got a backup point guard, who's been in a lot of big playoff games, and then you have another tough-minded, physical guy in Bruce Brown, who can, play both ends of the ball.
Yeah, I
So I
love
think
it for
that,
sure.
yeah.
They should definitely
Another
go
one,
out and get those guys.
yeah, another one that's been thrown out, put out, into the ether is Miles Bridges to Phoenix, which I think is kind of interesting.
Hmm.
Um, I'm curious as to how they would get him.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he doesn't make a lot of money, right? Because he's on the qualifying offer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it would probably end up being one of the guys that they traded for, I would think, right? So like one of either Grayson Allen or Nasir Little, or somebody like that. I don't know if Charlotte would do that. Maybe they would. Um, Obviously, it would be interesting, right? Because again, he would add to your offense. He'd make you more athletic. I don't really view him as like much of a defensive guy, but
Mm-mm.
he is an athletic guy. So he is like he's a type of player that you don't have a ton of in Phoenix. So he would help. Obviously, you'd have to take the PR hit. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so that would be interesting. Because Phoenix has had some PR issues the last few years, right? Because they had the owner, before that. But regardless, I don't know. I mean, like, it's a talent upgrade. I'm just curious as to like, would Charlotte do that? Because I feel like there's other teams that he's been like rumored to go to that I feel like I would kind of prefer what they have in terms of like what they could give up over Phoenix.
Yeah. And it's like, honestly, this is something that hasn't really been talked about, and I'm scared to say this, but Bridges is kind of having a season on the court similar, to the last time that he was on the court, which was pretty good, 20 points around the board. The efficiency is a little bit down, but regardless, you do have to feel good about, I guess, the on-court stuff, but, what would Phoenix be really willing to give up? That's what I would be asking is like, what's the return package going to look like? Like you said, the monetary stuff isn't going to be that big of a question. But like you said, also other teams are probably going to be vying for this guy as well, and probably will have better offers. But that is something that I hadn't really ever thought of, and it would be intriguing because I think he would fit their system offensively. Defensively, yeah, no shot.
I mean, but yeah, it's a talent upgrade, but it is kind of interesting, right? Because again, it's basically either Grayson Allen, Little, or Nurkic, right?
Yeah.
Nurkic has played relatively well for Phoenix, and he's been healthy. Grayson
Hmm.
Allen's played very well for Phoenix, so it's like I guess it would have to be Nasir Little, who's not playing a whole lot. But it's like I just feel like if I'm Charlotte, I feel like you could get maybe a little more, but maybe not much. Because again, like maybe because of the PR stuff, maybe teams wouldn't be willing to give up a ton. Because I feel like people would probably be upset if you gave up like a promising young guy and you brought in Bridges, especially because then you got to factor in like, whoever trades for him doesn't have his bird rights because he's on a qualifying offer. He'd be an unrestricted free agent. Um, so then that basically means that like, if he plays really well, which like you said he has this year, he could go anywhere, right? Like there's no guarantees you could bring him back. So that's the other issue as well, right? Like if you're Phoenix, let's say you trade for him and he plays well and maybe you still don't end up, winning the title and then he just walks.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I mean like I guess yeah, you just got the talent upgrade, but you weren't able to, to keep the asset. So
Yeah.
we'll see. But I feel like that's going to be the main difficulty for Phoenix is how are you going to be able to, you know, beat some of these other teams' offers. Like they may have to get a little bit more creative and maybe try to target some other guys that we may not necessarily be thinking of that could probably help the team. Because I feel like some of the bigger names may just be a little bit out of their reach, but you just never know.
Yeah, well, I think that's something
Um,
to watch though.
right. Um, Another one, the Hornets potential landing spot for D'Angelo Russell. I don't know necessarily about that one. I think mainly the conversation I think is stemming from what a lot of people have said about the Lakers Hawks talk so far is the idea of like the Hawks don't really want D'Angelo Russell, so it would be more so like flip him to a third team,
Hmm.
and then like what third team is interested in taking him on. I mean, again, it's not like he sucks. Like I feel like we had this conversation with Westbrook last year where it was like it's 2 first-round picks, right? It was like one to get rid of him and then another one to take him on, and then they
Hmm.
only gave up one. Like I mean, D'Lo is a fine player, right? Like he's a guy where it's like if he's on a team, like it's not going to be bad. Like I mean, again, we've talked about him before. I know we talked about how he had that horrible stretch in December, but I mean, honestly, outside of that, you'd probably say he's been their third best player this season. Um, if he's your third best player, I mean, I don't necessarily know how that makes somebody feel, but at the same time, um, but that's where it gets kind of interesting because again, if you trade him, like he's played very well, and then the other factor is if you don't trade him and he has that player option. So let's say he continues to play well because he's played great, in the month of January. I think since he's been back in the starting lineup, he's averaging like 25 a game or something
Yeah.
crazy like that.
Yeah.
So like this is like the best stretch he's had, as a Laker, this season basically. So, there could be a point where if he continues to play well, he could opt out and somebody may be willing to give him a little more than like 17 a year elsewhere. So like if you're the Lakers, you kind of have to tread this carefully because we already talked about it. But, like he does have value on the team as a guy who, as a point guard can get his own shot, but also can create for others. And that's a valuable, skill to have next to LeBron and AD. So it's one where you got to be a little wary of like just giving him up for just anything, right?
Yeah.
Like, because we talked about it earlier in the season, right? Where he's not like a bad basketball player, right? Like he's fine. I'm not like the biggest fan of him, but like he's still good enough where it's like you can't just like move him for nothing, like
Right.
where it's like or something lateral. If you're gonna trade him, it has to be for somebody that's an upgrade. And I guess the main question would be is Dejounte Murray, truly an upgrade from D'Angelo Russell? I guess in some ways you can say he is. I guess he's more athletic. Um, I know his ceiling defensively is higher. He's not been great defensively the last couple of years. And again, in fairness, because I don't watch a ton of Hawks games, I'm not sure if it's like a lack of effort or if it's like who he's playing next to.
Hmm.
But that's kind of the question. Like in terms of like I guess the first question would be like, again, like, do you feel like DeJounte Murray is a true upgrade from D'Angelo Russell? And then I guess the other question would be, because we don't even know like what the point of this would be from the Hawks perspective anyways. Like, why are you giving up a talented player for basically nothing? Right? Like, if you're not even going to take on D'Angelo Russell, like what are you going to do? Take on a guy who's on an expiring deal, right? Like they did that with John Collins where they traded him for Rudy Gay, and then bought him out. So I mean, like that doesn't make a lot of sense from Atlanta's perspective to me, but I guess that would be the main question. And then the other question would be, is there a team that you could see him being flipped to where it makes sense for him to like be on the team, on that team, as a potential, point guard option, right? Like I've heard some people mention like, what about Orlando, who has like a bajillion point guards, but maybe you move like a Gary Harris, or like what about Brooklyn since he played for Brooklyn before, or something like that, right? Like, so what are your thoughts, kind of on that?
Yeah. I mean, you already know me. I'm a big D'Lo guy. That's my guy. I love the play style. Like you were saying, it complements LeBron and AD so well. He's been putting up 16 points and 6 assists. That's pretty good, I think, to be playing alongside LeBron and Anthony Davis. But, you know, it's tough because I think he's been the scapegoat in a lot of situations that he's been in. Some of it is warranted, some of it unwarranted at times, but in this situation, I don't think you can necessarily, blame all the Lakers' struggles on him. So I would say probably hold on to him. I think you need to keep him. I think he's valuable to your team because honestly, I don't think DeJounte Murray is going to provide that much of a better impact. Like, I think you'll see it game to game, maybe, but like when it comes down to it, you're probably not going to walk away from the DeJounte Murray or a DeJounte Murray move happening feeling all that great about DeJounte Murray for D'Lo. You know what I mean? Like you were saying, they both have their upsides. They're completely different players, but in regards to impact alongside LeBron and Anthony Davis, I think you're going to be looking at similar, and I don't think the Lakers are in the position where they can afford to make a lateral or take a step back move. You know, they need to be making improvements. So I would probably look to improve somewhere else. I don't think you need to improve from the perspective of D'Lo, unless we're talking about a star that's better than D'Lo and DeJounte Murray. Like, no Zach LaVine stuff. Like, you know who I'm talking about. I'm talking like guys like in that Donovan Mitchell category, but I don't think those people are available for the Lakers. You know what I mean?
I don't. Yeah, because I mean, I know there's been rumors about like them being interested in those guys, but I think that's more of an off-season thing where it's
Mm-hmm.
like, once they like, if they wait until the offseason, they'll have 3 picks to move if they don't trade this 2029 one, and then they may do some of that in the offseason. But then it's like, can you really wait that long? Because then, like, then you're in the summer and you're basically kind of like, saying this is a lost season. So I don't know, because like I said, I don't mind it, like from the perspective of like, I guess you could say he's better, but at the same time, like, like when I looked at the list of problems, like as of late, like D'Lo isn't really towards the top of the list.
No.
I guess the main thing is like you kind of know how it's probably going to end, like come playoff time, because that's kind of been his issue where it's like, he's a very skilled offensive player. It's just, the difference between his floor and his ceiling really, is really wide,
Yeah.
right? Like the highs when he's good, it looks really good, right? Like in terms of, like you said, in terms of his play style, like it's up there when he's hot. Like it looks like, it looks like, a high level,
He looks like a number
all-star.
2 pick.
Yeah. But then, then when he has his lows, right, then that's the issue where it's like, he doesn't look that great, right?
Yeah,
Like,
and then he
like the
becomes
Denver
the
one
clown.
was like, and the Denver one was like subterraneanly low.
Yeah.
Like where that's probably like, but at the same time, we've seen it before, right? There's just like a certain level that he's just not necessarily able to reach. And
Sure.
I think that's kind of the question. But again, there's other things you'll have to do as well, right? It's like you said, just moving D'Lo for DeJounte Murray probably isn't quite enough, like to just be like, okay, now we're good. We don't have to do anything else, right?
They're
Like that's
both too
probably
inconsistent for me to feel good, about moving one for the other, if you know what I mean. Like D'Lo, I think we agree that they're both very good players, but their lows are so low to the point where you don't feel good about either of them when they're that low. So, I would think maybe if you're going to trade him, maybe trade for more stability. I don't think DeJounte Murray gives you stability. And I think the Lakers need some sense of stability, especially considering, certain guys on this team maybe shouldn't even really be getting minutes on other teams. You know what I mean? Like Taurean Prince, I don't know how many rosters he's going to be, vying for a lot of minutes.
not
Cam Reddish, too. Vando, I don't know. Rui,
right.
it's weird. It's just a weird hodgepodge, a mess, and
Yeah,
I don't know.
and I think that's kind of where you're sort of like kind of implying is like the forward spot is probably also
Yes.
a place that you need to look to upgrade. Because again, like when we talk about the coaches, like sometimes you kind of have to like look at it like from what is their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Like, 'cause I know everybody hates like the starting five with Taurean Prince in it, which I can understand because it just doesn't feel like it's big or physical enough,
Sure.
which kind of seems like it goes against what they want to do. My guess is that he probably feels like that Darvin Ham probably feels like he's like the closest that you kind of have, I guess, to like a 3-and-D ish wing. Because like I guess the issue with Vanderbilt is he's good defensively, but then you have some issues on offense. Rui's your best offensive player, but then you probably have some issues in terms of like, like he's a little slow, for like a small forward type guy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could just put him at the 4 and move LeBron to the 3. But then
Yeah.
it's like against some teams, do you want LeBron at the 3? So you don't
Right.
have like really any great options. So that's my guess. I mean,
At this point, just get Kuz, honestly.
yeah, like I probably still wouldn't start Prince just because I just feel like it's just not big enough. You know what I mean?
No.
Because we talked about like all season, like they look their best when they play bigger lineups, and like it's when you have D'Lo and Reeves together, that's really small. We've talked about it, right? It's not that small. It's not that big. It's not that athletic. It's not that physical, and it can be pushed around on defense, and it makes their defense, you know, 10 times more difficult to sustain because it's like yeah, there's gonna be some teams where that'll be okay. Like if it's like a puny team, but like, against a team, that's got like relatively legitimate size or physicality, that's really difficult. So, um, that's what I would say.
Yeah.
Like I mean, again, if you could move D'Angelo Russell for an upgrade, you do it. but I wouldn't just do it like for just anybody, right? Like,
Yeah.
like when people say like, oh, move him for, I don't know, like Dorian Finney-Smith. Like, I'm like,
Yeah. No. 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 No.
like I think that's yeah, you got a better forward, but now you're like very deficient at point guard.
And that guy
You know?
forgot how to shoot, in my opinion. But whatever.
Right, and also then it's like it makes you very deficient at the point guard spot, and like you need at least one. And
Yeah.
with Gabe Vincent being hurt, and out, you don't, other than D'Lo, you don't have any other point guards. I guess LeBron, but again, you don't want him doing that, the whole season.
Yeah.
So, and then
Exactly.
moving on, some interesting, weird stuff, right? The Pistons talked about DeJounte Murray, apparently, but then Atlanta asked for it was Jaden Ivey and Asor Thompson. And
Yeah.
obviously, Detroit's gonna say no.
Yeah. What is this? My league? Oh
I mean,
God.
like the thing is, we always hear like sometimes like these trade negotiations that don't go anywhere, and it's always like Team A asks like for for player B on another team, and like they ask for something ridiculous, right? Like, wasn't it like there was one where it was like I think when Durant first asked to be traded from Brooklyn, and then like Brooklyn said like when they talked to Boston, it was like give us like Jalen Brown or Jason Tatum or something
Yeah.
like that. And it's like no way Boston does that. Like
No.
they're not giving up Brown and Tatum for Kevin Durant.
No.
Like,
It's
that
not gonna
so
happen.
like that's where it's like that's probably like an initial negotiation that just somebody put out there. But like
Mm-hmm.
of course Atlanta's gonna ask like for because again Murray's a good player, so like ideally
Sure.
you're not gonna try to just get back complete garbage for DeJounte Murray.
Right.
Um,
Considering
and
what
I'm
they
not
gave
calling
up too.
yeah yeah, and I'm not calling any players complete garbage, but you know what I mean. Like you
You
gave
want
up a
good
decent
returns, dude.
yeah, you want a good return to justify trading him, but at the same time, like, why are you trading him in the first place? We already talked about it, right? Like, yeah, they've acknowledged that it hasn't worked, so it makes sense to probably just move on from it. It's just like you're not gonna probably get back ideally what you want. That doesn't mean you settle, and that's where like it's possible like he could be one of those guys where it's closer to February 8th. I feel like if you're a team that wants him, you don't really want to wait that long. But you just never know, because like some of these teams might just wait and be like, hey, let's see what happens. Let's see. Maybe, some team comes out of nowhere and is like asking, for DeJounte Murray and like they might give us something really crazy. So,
Right.
um, and then also according to the Athletic, right? Apparently Detroit's not going to trade their young core, which again makes sense. They mentioned like they're not going to trade Cade or Asor or Duran or Ivy. Again, that kind of makes sense to me right now. Again, you got to see what you got. Are all those guys going to be there, long term? Maybe not. But, this year is not the time to just trade him. That could always be an off-season thing.
Yeah.
We'll see. Come draft time, is there a guy maybe they want? Maybe they trade up. I doubt it just because people talk about this draft is not amazing.
Right.
So, but either way, it makes sense because like again, those are good young players, and again, you don't just trade them for like literally nothing because like what's out there, right? Like what is it? What is somebody offering to get those guys? Now
Yeah.
maybe you go into next season and maybe it's like it's not working. We got to move one of these guys, and then maybe you do it. But like right now this season, you're kind of just like you're just kind of just surviving, I
Bro,
guess,
the
right? Like
season's over, bro. Just
yeah,
wait till the off season. Figure
right, like.
your stuff out then.
Yeah, like maybe you trade some of the veteran guys, like to playoff contenders or something like that. But like, yeah, it's a lost season. So
Yeah.
at this point, you should just play your young guys, see what you got, see what they can do, and then go from there. But knowing that team, that's probably not what they're gonna do. So
Yeah. They'll probably go in the opposite direction.
yeah, like like in the sense of like they're not gonna like because again, like Thompson doesn't even start. He comes off the bench,
That's my
doesn't
point.
really play a whole lot after playing a lot early in the season. It's like
Yeah.
he's good.
Exactly.
He
Can we
can't.
just let him can we let him go? Like, jeez, bro.
It's like he can't shoot, but like he's still good. Like he's
Yeah.
still impactful. Like it just, it's just weird. But anyways, yeah. Regardless, I don't know.
Yeah, I hate talking
The
about
Pistons.
Detroit. I really hate them.
Sometimes it just makes you sad.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then next up, according to Jason Kidd, Griffin firing puts head coaches on alert. He believes anyone could be fired, even with one of the best records in the league. Yeah, great insight, buddy.
Yeah,
I mean,
I mean
yeah,
he's
that's kind
not
of an
wrong.
obvious one right there. I mean, we've already seen coaches who had won championships in previous years be fired. Not gonna lie, is it possible he's another guy that could possibly be on the chopping block? Because
Yeah,
Dallas hasn't played quite as well as of late. Obviously, they've had injury stretches, so that hasn't helped. But I don't know. But regardless, yeah, I feel like that's kind of an obvious one.
yeah. I mean, he was pretty much just stating the obvious. I think anybody in any position can, be fired at any given point. But hey, I mean, it's an eye opener, and sometimes those wake up calls may light a fire under certain coaches, and we'll see what happens.
And according to Woj, right, Wiz are hesitant to trade Kuzma. Washington not looking to move Kuz despite fielding calls. I don't necessarily know if I completely buy it. I think some of it's a little bit of posturing, because I think they would like to get back, multiple firsts for Kuzma. And he's a good player, so like,
Yeah.
maybe a team does it, but is it something that like somebody's automatically gonna do? Maybe not, but at the same time, like if somebody gave them like a decent offer, they would probably still take it. Because I
Yeah.
mean, like again, he's a guy that could help a contending team, and I feel like he's one of those guys where like because some of the other guys are already off the board, he might be one of the next guys up where somebody's like, well, we didn't get this guy, but maybe we could bring in Kuzma, and see what he can do.
Somebody's gonna settle for him because from what I've seen, he's taken a step up in his game. I think, although if you're the best player on the Wizards, that's not really saying too much, but I think he will be able to help a team that's probably looking to not necessarily get over the hump, but just make solid improvements. Maybe a team like the Kings. I've kind of always thought that those two guys or those two teams, should probably work out a deal. I think that's the most ideal situation for him to go to. And it should be intriguing what we get back. That's what I really want. I just want them to take the best deal. If they are going to deal out Kyle Kuzma, that's all I really care about. Like I do, wish him all the best if he does leave, and I do want him to go to a successful team, successful franchise. But regardless, the main thing I really, really do care about is 100% the return value. So if we get multiple firsts, I'm all in on it. So I'm gonna feel good about it regardless.
Yeah. And yeah, because that's the thing. Ideally, you want the best return for
Yep.
him. You don't want to just like, get nothing back. Because I mean, he's good enough to where you shouldn't just get nothing back. But
Right.
at the same time, I don't know how much like people are like, going out of their way to like be like, oh, we have to get this guy. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? We'll see. Um, but I think he could be one of those guys that could definitely help, a team in need of, some more punch at that, at the forward position.
Yeah. Somebody's gonna settle for him, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, we're gonna keep you posted, right, with all the trades and all the news around the league. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Obviously, keep in mind we are gonna have a live stream on February 8th. From probably noon to 3:15, 30ish. Because obviously the trade deadline ends at 3 p.m. Eastern time, and sometimes you have a couple of trades that kind of come out after the 3 o'clock deadline. So we'll probably run until then. But regardless, we'll keep you posted. So thanks for listening. And we will see you Monday.